Although if the questions get too tough, it's not far from me. Thank you, John, for the invitation to be here, and Ashley, thank you for that invitation. Thank you all for being here. I'm honored to be here tonight. I tell people this time of year, right after the session, I'm a college football fan. This is sort of the locker room show after the game, okay, when we gather around and with the benefit of hindsight, we sort of dissect everything that we did wrong and what we would have done different and how we could do it perfectly in the session of the General Assembly that we just finished. And so, and I understand that coming in, and I always try to reflect back on the session after it's over and kind of remember, how we got to where we got to and some of the things that we did. So with that in mind, what I want to do is just give you kind of a brief overview from on the session, share with you 2 or 3 takeaways that I had from the session, and then we'll open it up for questions. And I'll tell you now, if you're thinking about questions, I have a very simple ground rule. You can ask anything you want. I just don't have to answer it. So with that in mind, we'll talk. And let me, she's sitting down back there. But I have to give a shout out to Beth Beskin. Beth came in as a freshman this session, and I got to tell you, she had a baptism by fire. And it truly impressed me as one of the better House members that we have, and y'all are very, very fortunate here in Atlanta and Buckhead to have her, and I guess part of Sandy Springs. No?
All my districts in the city of Atlanta, it's all local counties, so once you get to Sandy Springs, you're not like a...
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
That's your rule.
Okay. Well, he also represents part of St. Simon's Island, so one of those land bridges that Dan Connor created for him. But Beth is a good friend, and I want to tell you publicly how much I appreciate your efforts this session. This was a challenging session. We'll start with that as sort of a predicate. We came into this session knowing that we had some issues that we kind of had to deal with. We always have to deal with the budget. And if we don't do anything else, we have to pass a budget here in Georgia, a balanced budget, by the way. And we were able to do that this session. The budget this year that we passed is a $21.8 billion budget. It represented about a little over $900 million in new spending over last year. Now, before you go out and say, oh, you're raising spending, that gets us back to about what we were spending in calendar and fiscal year 2008 because of all the cuts that we had experienced as a state government during the economic downturn. Of the new money in the budget, 58% went into education. Most of the rest was consumed by health care costs, and some went to transportation, and of course all the other things that we do as a state government. But we did make a very deliberate effort to try to restore some of the austerity cuts that we had made to public education here in Georgia, going back to the beginning of the economic downturn, and still maintain some responsible financial management. I think we did that. We have still managed through in preserving our AAA bond rating, one of only 8 states in the nation. I think that's something Georgians can take great pride in. You need some help? How much does it pay? But we did we did meet that challenge. The other thing that people want to talk about a little bit is a little bill called House Bill 170, the transportation bill. And I'm going to take just a minute and tell you about that. House Bill 170 actually started in the 2014 session, when the members of the House unanimously passed a joint resolution with the Senate creating a joint study committee to examine how we fund our transportation infrastructure needs here in Georgia. And I challenge you sometime, and I won't go into all the details, but to go back and look at all of the premises that were contained in that resolution. Premises that were founded on the need to protect and maintain our infrastructure, to undertake repairs, do maintenance, before we ever got to improvements and enhancements. That was passed unanimously, which meant that every member of the House that year believed that this was something that was worthy of study. So we created a joint study committee with the Senate, some House members, some Senate members, who went all over the state last summer and last fall, having public hearings, engaging Georgians on what kind of transportation future they felt like we needed here in Georgia. They looked at the need for repair and maintenance. They looked at the need for enhancements and improvements. They came back with a report at the end of the year, which did not recommend a specific proposal, but laid out sort of a menu of options for us to think about, some of which we accepted and some of which we didn't. But the undeniable part of that report was that we were we had a critical need to do a lot of work here in Georgia that previous General Assemblies for decades and decades had chosen not to do, and had kicked the can down the road. I took the view that this was the year we had to do that. It's a non-election year. Makes things a little easier. Everybody in an election year kind of focuses on election year things, which would kind of rule out next year. And then if you wait 2 years until the next odd numbered year, then you're 2 years deeper in the hole than you were coming into this year in terms of need. So we introduced a bill in the House that went through a lot of iterations, went through many, many hearings. We got lots of input from House members, and the public still could weigh in. And then we ended up passing the House version of House Bill 170 and sending it over to the Senate. And the Senate then took some time with that version. They passed a different version, which is not unheard of, and sent it back to us. And then we had a conference committee that produced a report near the end of the session, which led ultimately to what was passed as House Bill 170. It had some controversy, but I think it will allow Georgia to be competitive in terms of meeting our needs as a state going forward. We have bridges in this state that are actually in a state of disrepair today, that are probably 50 years or more behind in terms of having maintenance done on them. We are many, many years behind on resurfacing a lot of our main arteries here in Georgia. And this bill will allow us to do that. And really, one key thing that never really got talked about a lot is it will allow us to reduce our dependency on the federal government for our transportation funding. Because one of the things that don't get reported often enough is that we're number one in the Southeast in terms of our dependence on federal money in transportation. 54% of our transportation spending comes from Washington, when they can't even pass a transportation bill now. So we passed that. It was not an easy vote for many of our members, and I told them going in that sometimes we have those votes, and you just got to kind of reach down deep and decide what's important to you, and realize that the people that sent you down here to do what you think is right, and you got to make that determination. So that's transportation, and I may have some questions on that, and I'll be happy to talk about those. One of the other really important measures that we passed was Governor Deal's Opportunity School District constitutional amendment. Something he felt very passionate about. I think he made a very forceful case for, which will allow, in very limited circumstances, an office within the Office of Student Achievement to come in and help school districts that don't just fail one time. These are school districts that are persistent failures, repeated failures. And the only people who are being harmed by that are students. And this hopefully will give them an opportunity to now have hope, assuming that constitutional amendment passes in November of 2016, to kind of come out of that. But that was a tough vote, because that required a constitutional amendment, which meant 2/3 of each chamber, and that's kind of hard to do, even considering that the Senate has a supermajority. We're one short of a supermajority, but we're a big tent, even in the House, and getting all the House members to agree on every issue is not an easy thing to do, and it probably shouldn't be, frankly, because they represent different kinds of districts. We passed some other measures that we had been working on for a couple of years. The medical cannabis bill was finally passed, and passed in both houses. We've still got a little bit of work to do on that in terms of finding a pathway forward on an infrastructure to provide the cannabis oil here in the state. Right now it's pretty much a immunity from prosecution in limited circumstances kind of bill, but I think that is a very, very positive start. We passed, the Senate had the autism mandate bill that some of us in the House were concerned about as being a mandate on small business, and being maybe a little bit unfair. And so we agreed on some fairly significant changes to that, and got that passed, and that was something they felt passionate about, and as we did on medical cannabis. Had a lot of other issues. The brewery bill, I know, had a lot of interest. We were able, I think, to make some improvements in the law and make that a little bit more palatable for small breweries and distilleries that are popping up around the state, and I think that was a good measured bill. We had the Tesla bill, and I'm sure there's some that I'm leaving out, but on the whole, I think that it for the little bit of controversy that the session might have generated, I think it was a very favorable session, because I think people realized that, in 40 days we can go and do some pretty big lifting, and I was proud of the members of the General Assembly for that. People have asked me, well, what did you kind of take away from this session? And I think there's probably three things that I took away, probably more, but three that really stick out in my mind. One, we found out this session, I think, that the word bipartisanship is not an ugly word, and a little bit of healthy bipartisanship can be a good thing. And it was on transportation, and it certainly was on the Opportunity School Districts bill. Two, we found out that, lo and behold, the House and the Senate can have a session where they're not fussing at each other. I think we worked particularly well together this session. We made a resolve to do that before the session started, and I was pleased that we were able to do that, because I think, frankly, we had some issues that were too big for us to engage in kind of the rivalry that has gone on forever and probably will between the two chambers. And the third takeaway is one that I kind of vent about from time to time, and I get reminded of it. And that is this. You know, I've had either the benefit or maybe it's just the experience of serving in kind of two different eras. So I served in the Senate back before I knew better. And I served over there before there was an internet, before Al Gore invented it. When people got copies of bills by calling your office and saying, would you mail me, you know, like leave a stamp on it and put it in the post office kind of mail, a copy of a bill. They didn't have ready access to the kind of information that's a mouse click away right now for anybody that has a computer. You would think, with all that information, that the quality of the political discussion out there would probably be a little higher. Wrong. There's still a massive amount of misinformation out there. Well, I know, despite everything Charlie Harper does, still out there, and I think that's unfortunate. That people probably rely on people they shouldn't to know what's going on down there when we need to be educating them, that they have these resources ready at hand to go study for themselves the truth of the matter. Because I get calls a lot, I get emails. I usually don't answer them unless they're from my district. But I'll call them and say, you know, where in the world did you get the idea that this was in this bill? Well, I got an email from somebody, or I got a piece of mail or something from somebody. I said, if you've gone and read the bill, you remember how we used to talk about Obamacare? Did you read the bill? You know, I said, go read the bill. And then they read the bill and they call back and say, you know, you were right. So anyway, that's kind of three takeaways that I had from the session. And so with that, John, I'm just going to stop right here and answer some questions.
Awesome.
How about that? Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, this is, in my opinion, I think it's one of the more successful and memorable sessions in quite a while. Is it too early to preview or what may be up, either what was left on the table or what may be coming up next year?
Transportation will not be on the table next year. Well, it's not too early. I think a couple of things that the governor's created the Education Funding Study Commission to look at how we fund public education here in the state. And they're meeting this year, and I suspect they're going to bring back some recommendations by the end of the year. That's going to be a big deal. We've talked about this for every governor in my memory, going back to, or at least Joe Frank Harris has talked about how we fund public education, and so I'm looking forward to their work and their recommendations. I think that's going to certainly be a big issue next session. You go look at the study committees that we created this session, for example. There's been a lot of interest expressed in expansion of the gaming laws here in Georgia with pari-mutuel betting, and I'm not saying that's going to pass or fail. It didn't get out of the Senate this time, but I understand there's going to be a lot of discussion between now and next session, and we created a study committee in the House to look at that issue over the interim, and I think you may hear some discussion about that next year. So I think that's a couple of things that I would keep an eye on. Who's next? Yes, ma'am.
What are a couple of examples of the misinformation that you found most pernicious this year that were circulating about some of the bills?
Well, there's quite a few. I don't know that I would label this misinformation. I know that there was one or two measures that people were talking a lot about on the radio, I understand, and telling people mischaracterizing things that were in bills and mischaracterizing individuals associated with debate on those bills that I think was very, very unfortunate. The RIFRA bill, for example, was one I think that I think was is a well-intentioned measure, but I think it was handicapped, frankly, by a lot of the efforts to sort of get it passed. Transportation, there was a lot of misinformation about what we were trying to do on that. In fact, I had somebody tell me just a few days ago, a member that somebody said, well, I hear you've raised taxes 26 cents a gallon. No, we didn't raise it 26 cents a gallon. It's at 26 cents a gallon. So that's a couple of examples that kind of come quickly to my mind.
Yes, sir.
I'm certainly not a cannabis oil expert, but with the federal law with interstate commerce and it being currently illegal, are we going to start producing marijuana in Georgia in some capacity, or how are we going to deal with that?
The House Bill 1 that passed this year has a study commission in it that will be composed of some law enforcement people, some healthcare people, some legislative people, and others to look at finding a pathway there. The big barrier is the federal prohibition, obviously, and so finding a way to see if it's going to be feasible legally or administratively or whatever to produce that here is going to be a challenge, frankly. But they're going to tackle that issue outside of the legislative session, and we know that's sort of a missing link in the bill or in the law now that has been signed, it's going to be a challenge, and I'm not an expert either, but it's going to be a challenge, I think, to get to sort of finesse how we do that in view of the federal law as it exists. Who's next?
Any non-white?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Crawford Brand, one of the co-owners here. Welcome. SB 63 was particularly important to us, and also part-time resident of Blue Ridge. But would love to hear your thoughts on that bill.
Well, I got a lot of local pressure from guys up there. I'm sure about that because I've got two of the best craft brewers in the state up there.
We're almost the best.
Oh, all the best. Okay, yeah. Next to you.
That's
Next
right.
to you. That's I've been pleasantly surprised at the reaction to the final version of 63 that passed. I know that it wasn't what the advocates wanted, but yet I think it was taking some positive steps in a good direction. And as I don't know if all of you know this, but what it ended up passing was a bill that will allow breweries to sell a 6-pack or a 72-ounce growler. I'm sorry.
We're not allowed to.
You're not allowed to sell the beer. You can come and tour the brewery.
Well, we're actually not allowed to be able to do any of that. It's a brew pub.
Okay, you're right.
We got stripped out of it.
Yeah. And frankly, I think that was a political thing, just to be very candid with you. I want to revisit that next session. But the non-brew pubs can now do a 6-pack or a 72-ounce growler as a gift or as a reward, I guess, for coming and touring their facility. So that was the sort of compromise that came out of that. And you say, well, what does that do? Well, it does a lot more than they could do before. So, it was a baby step in the right direction, except for brew pubs. Yes, sir.
I have a question about the transportation bill, and it's the fact that we're raising a certain amount of taxes on Georgia public. But I want to, and I realize I get your point of how you say we've been kicking the can down the road and not been addressing the issue in the past, and we definitely have a problem with our infrastructure. However, I want to know if there's any kind of timeline or any kind of strict enforcement within the legislation that actually gets the job done, as opposed to kicking a can down the road.
No, that's a great question. In other words, how can we be sure that DOT is going to do what they should do now? Right? Much of the new money is now going to be under the General Assembly, who you can vote out or in every 2 years, which you can't do with the Department of Transportation. So I think you've now got a political accountability component that you haven't had before. So I think that will, I think that's going to make a huge difference, frankly, because I think that Georgians can hold us accountable. They feel like they're sort of isolated or distanced from DOT and can't do that as much. So I think I would point to that as being, as putting in some accountability. And you made a comment about, the cost on Georgians. We were very sensitive to that. And if you look at the parts of the bill, the hotel motel tax was designed, or the $5 fee was designed to make sure that people who visited us help pay for our roads, and not Georgians. It's kind of like the local option sales taxes. So we were sensitive to trying to find ways that we didn't just pound on citizens of Georgia for this. And here's the interesting thing about that. And I was reading the other day that one of my favorite cities in the state was afraid that a lot of tourism business and convention business was going to go across to South Carolina. The idea for that came from South Carolina. They've already got it. So, but that's a good question. Any others? Yes, ma'am.
If I could ask one follow-up.
Sure.
About the political accountability.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks have pointed to the recent appointment of Representative Jay Roberts to the Department of Transportation as kind of an evidence that there might be some kind of revolving door with the General Assembly and the Department of Transportation. Can you comment on that?
Has he been appointed?
I was reading it in the Political Insider, so it may, at this point, it's just.
You believe that? He's still a member of the House, to my knowledge, tonight.
So there's not any kind of knowledge that you have.
I know what I read. I know what I hear. I don't know that that's true. Representative Roberts hasn't told me that that's going to happen. I will tell you that I'm not sure really what you mean by the revolving door. And I don't know if you know Chairman Roberts or not, but Chairman Roberts has chaired the House Transportation Committee for 7 or 8 years, and I don't know that there's anybody in the state that understands transportation issues as well as he does. My answer is I don't know anything other than what you've heard about the appointment. I will say if he's appointed, that's going to be a good appointment. He'll do a good job.
2 more questions, Max.
Good.
Did I hear you say that we're one away from a supermajority in the House?
Do you get there?
All right.
How about that? Good answer. I want y'all to help John. He's got an uphill battle, but I think he's ready for it. Yeah, we're at 119, and it takes 120 to pass a constitutional amendment in the House. The Senate has that. We don't. We've got an independent member of the House who sometimes votes with us, and we can get there. But love to have you. Last question. Well, thank you all for having me, and go Hawks tonight.